The glass walls of Henderson Industries' executive conference room gleamed under the fluorescent lights as my father paced behind the mahogany table, his expensive suit wrinkled from what I assumed had been a sleepless night dealing with whatever crisis had prompted this emergency Sunday morning meeting. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline stretched toward the horizon, a testament to the business empire my grandfather had built from nothing and my father had expanded into a billion-dollar public corporation. I stood outside the conference room holding 2 cups of coffee, one for myself and one I had planned to offer Dad before the meeting began, watching through the transparent walls as my brothers Marcus and David arranged documents and pulled up financial data on the massive wall-mounted screens. Their movements had the urgent efficiency of people dealing with a serious crisis, and their expressions carried the weight of executives who knew their decisions would affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in shareholder value. "The preliminary numbers look worse than we thought," Marcus was saying as he scrolled through what appeared to be quarterly revenue reports on his laptop. "The shortfall is significant, and if we can't find a way to explain it to the board tomorrow, we're looking at potential SEC investigations." David nodded grimly while highlighting sections of a thick financial report with a yellow marker. "The auditors are asking questions we can't answer," he said. "There are discrepancies in the subsidiary accounting that don't make sense, and the cash flow projections are showing gaps that could indicate serious structural problems." Dad stopped pacing and leaned against the conference table, his knuckles white as he gripped the polished wood surface. "We have 18 hours to figure this out before the quarterly earnings call," he said, his voice carrying the strain of someone facing potential professional and personal disaster. "If we can't present a coherent explanation for these numbers, the stock price will collapse and take the entire company with it." I approached the conference room door and raised my hand to knock, planning to offer my assistance with whatever crisis they were trying to resolve. Henderson Industries had been my life for the past 8 years. First as an intern during college, then as a junior analyst and most recently as the head of subsidiary financial integration. If there were accounting discrepancies and cash flow problems, I was probably the person best equipped to help them find solutions. "Family only, you wouldn't understand business," Dad declared as he noticed me approaching the door, his voice carrying through the glass walls with devastating clarity. "This is an emergency executive meeting for people who actually understand how corporations work." The dismissal hit me like a physical blow. For 8 years, I had been learning every aspect of Henderson Industries operations, working my way up from entry-level positions despite having an MBA from Wharton and a deep understanding of corporate finance. But apparently my father still saw me as the little girl who used to play with calculators in his office, not as a qualified executive who might actually be able to help. My brothers high-fived, excluding me from the emergency meeting, and I watched through the glass walls as Marcus and David exchanged satisfied grins, clearly pleased that their sister had been officially excluded from the crisis management process. Their expressions carried the smug satisfaction of men who believed they had successfully protected their territory from female interference. "Finally," I heard Marcus say as Dad firmly shut the conference room door, "we can handle this crisis without having to explain basic business concepts to someone who thinks accounting is just advanced arithmetic." David laughed and opened his briefcase to reveal more financial documents. "Seriously, what does she think she could contribute? We're dealing with SEC regulations, subsidiary integration and quarterly earnings projections. This isn't exactly entry-level work." Their casual dismissal of my qualifications would have been laughable if it weren't so professionally devastating. Both of my brothers had business degrees from decent schools, but neither had my specialized training in financial analysis or my hands-on experience with the subsidiary operations that were apparently causing their current crisis. I stood outside the conference room for a moment, watching them struggle with documents and data that I had been working with for months, listening to them debate solutions to problems I had already identified and resolved in preliminary reports they had apparently never bothered to read. I texted, "Good luck with the quarterly reports," and settled into my corner office 3 doors down from the conference room, where I had a clear view of the wall-mounted stock ticker that displayed Henderson Industries' share price in real time. The current price was $47.83 per share, down about 8% from Friday's close but still within normal volatility ranges for a Sunday morning. I opened my laptop and pulled up the comprehensive financial analysis I had completed 3 weeks ago, the report that detailed exactly what my brothers were now discovering in their emergency crisis session. The subsidiary accounting discrepancies they were panicking about, the cash flow gaps they couldn't explain, the regulatory compliance issues that threatened SEC investigations, all of it was documented in my analysis, along with detailed recommendations for addressing each problem. The report had been sitting in Dad's email inbox for 21 days, marked as unread despite 3 follow-up messages from me requesting feedback and approval to implement the recommended solutions. I had also sent copies to Marcus and David, both of whom had apparently deleted the emails without reading them, probably assuming that anything from their sister couldn't possibly contain important business information. Then I watched our stock price crash in real time, as the morning trading session began and investors started processing the implications of Henderson Industries' financial irregularities, which were apparently becoming public knowledge faster than my family had anticipated. $47.83 became $44.15 in the first 5 minutes of trading. Then $41.22 as automated trading algorithms detected the downward momentum and began executing sell orders. The volume indicator showed massive activity, millions of shares changing hands as institutional investors dumped their Henderson Industries positions based on leaked information about the quarterly earnings problems. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see my father and brothers hunched over their laptops, probably watching the same stock ticker with growing horror as they realized their 18-hour timeline for crisis resolution had suddenly become irrelevant. The market was reacting to information they thought was still confidential, which meant their problems were now public knowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate who worked as a financial analyst for one of Henderson Industries' institutional investors. "Sophia, what the hell is happening with your family's company? We just got an emergency sell recommendation from our research team based on rumors about accounting irregularities." I typed back, "Family business meeting in progress. They're handling it." The response was technically accurate but deliberately understated. My family was indeed handling the crisis, just not very effectively. $41.22 became $38.95 as more investors joined the selling frenzy. The trading volume had reached levels typically seen during major corporate scandals or natural disasters, with millions of shares being dumped every few minutes as panic spread through the investment community. Through the glass walls, I watched Dad gesticulating frantically while Marcus and David struggled to make sense of financial reports they were apparently seeing for the first time. Their crisis management strategy seemed to involve pointing at charts and raising their voices, which was not typically effective for addressing SEC compliance issues or restoring investor confidence. My laptop chimed with an email from the Securities and Exchange Commission, a formal inquiry about Henderson Industries' subsidiary accounting practices and cash flow reporting. The investigators wanted detailed explanations for the discrepancies my brothers were just discovering, along with comprehensive documentation of all financial transactions over the past 18 months. I forwarded the SEC inquiry to Dad's email with a brief note. This arrived in my inbox because I'm listed as the subsidiary financial integration specialist. Thought you should be aware. 30 seconds later, Dad's assistant knocked on my office door with obvious urgency. "Ms. Henderson, your father needs to see you in the conference room immediately." I saved my work, closed my laptop, and walked back to the conference room where my family was struggling with problems I had identified and solved weeks ago. Through the glass walls, I could see them staring at their phones and computer screens with expressions of growing panic as the stock price continued its relentless decline. $38.95 had become $34.62, representing a loss of over 25% of the company's market value in less than an hour of trading. The volume indicators showed no signs of the selling pressure easing, and the financial news websites were starting to publish articles about Henderson Industries' mysterious financial problems. Dad opened the conference room door with the desperate urgency of someone whose entire world was collapsing in real time. "Sophia, we need your help," he said, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. "There's been some kind of mistake with the financial reports, and the SEC is asking questions we can't answer." "What kind of questions?" I asked calmly, though I already knew exactly what the SEC wanted to know because I had been preparing for their inquiry for weeks. "They want documentation for subsidiary transactions that don't seem to exist in our main accounting system," Marcus explained frantically. There are millions of dollars in transfers that aren't properly categorized, and the cash flow statements don't match the subsidiary reports. I nodded thoughtfully, as if this were new information requiring careful consideration. How long have you been aware of these discrepancies? We just discovered them this morning, David said desperately. We were preparing for tomorrow's earnings call when we realized the numbers didn't add up. The auditors flagged several issues that we can't explain. I see, I replied, settling into a chair at the conference table while my brothers and father stared at me with the desperate hope of people drowning in financial quicksand. And you need help understanding the subsidiary integration processes? Yes, Dad said quickly. We need to understand how the money flows between the parent company and the subsidiaries, and why the accounting systems aren't properly synchronized. I opened my laptop and pulled up the financial analysis report I had completed 3 weeks earlier. The same report that had been sitting unread in their email inboxes while they focused on what they considered more important business matters. You mean this analysis? I asked, turning my laptop screen toward them so they could see the comprehensive report that detailed every aspect of the subsidiary financial integration problems they were just discovering. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Dad's face went through several color changes as he recognized the document he had ignored for 3 weeks. Marcus and David leaned forward to read the executive summary, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as they realized the scope of what they had missed. You already knew about these problems? Dad asked weakly. I identified them 7 months ago during the routine subsidiary audit, I explained calmly. The accounting discrepancies, the cash flow gaps, the regulatory compliance issues, everything you're panicking about today was documented in my preliminary report last October. Why didn't you tell us? Marcus demanded, though his voice lacked conviction because we all knew I had tried to tell them repeatedly. I sent this analysis to all 3 of you on November 15th, I replied, scrolling through my email history to show them the timestamps and delivery confirmations. I also sent follow-up messages on November 22nd, December 3rd, and December 18th, requesting feedback and approval to implement the recommended solutions. The email trail was damning evidence of their negligence and my diligence. Months of warnings ignored, solutions rejected, expertise dismissed because it came from someone they didn't consider a real business executive. But if you knew about these problems, why didn't you fix them? David asked desperately. Because I don't have authorization to make changes to subsidiary accounting procedures, I explained patiently. Those decisions require executive approval, which I requested multiple times and never received. Dad was staring at his phone, where the stock price had dropped to $31.47 and showed no signs of stabilizing. Henderson Industries was hemorrhaging market value by the minute, and every delay in addressing the crisis made recovery more difficult and expensive. What do we do now? He asked, his voice hollow with the realization that his dismissal of my expertise had potentially cost the family business hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization. We implement the solutions I recommended 3 weeks ago, I replied, pulling up the detailed action plan that accompanied my financial analysis. But the timeline is now compressed because the problems are public knowledge instead of internal issues we could have addressed quietly. How long will that take? Marcus asked, clearly hoping for a quick fix that would restore investor confidence before the market closed. If we had started when I first recommended these changes, we could have resolved everything quietly over a period of weeks, I said. Now that the SEC is involved and the stock price is crashing, we're looking at months of intensive remediation work, plus regulatory oversight and probably congressional hearings. The implications were staggering. What could have been a routine internal audit correction had become a public relations disaster that threatened the company's survival and the family's legacy. Sophia, Dad said carefully, we need you to take charge of this situation. We need your expertise to guide us through the SEC investigation and the financial remediation process. The request was both gratifying and infuriating. After months of being dismissed as someone who wouldn't understand business, I was suddenly the only person they trusted to save the company from the consequences of their arrogance and negligence. I can do that, I agreed, but there need to be some changes in how this company operates going forward. What kind of changes? David asked nervously. First, I want immediate promotion to Chief Financial Officer with full authority over all financial operations and subsidiary management, I said. Second, I want a formal apology from all three of you for dismissing my expertise and ignoring my warnings. Third, I want a written guarantee that my recommendations will be taken seriously in the future. The demands were reasonable given the circumstances, but they represented a fundamental shift in family power dynamics that my father and brothers were reluctant to accept. CFO. Marcus repeated weakly. But that's a senior executive position. You don't have the experience. I have more relevant experience than anyone else in this room, I interrupted firmly. I've been managing subsidiary financial integration for 2 years, I have an MBA in corporate finance, and I'm apparently the only person who saw this crisis coming months ago. Dad was still watching the stock price, which had dropped to $28.93 and was approaching levels that would trigger automatic trading halts. Fine, he said desperately. CFO, formal apology, written guarantees, whatever you need. Just fix this before we lose everything. I'll also need a budget for remediation consultants, legal counsel and PR management, I continued. This crisis is going to require significant resources to resolve properly. How much? David asked, though his tone suggested he was prepared to approve any amount that might save the company. Probably $8 to $10 million over the next 6 months, I estimated. Plus potential SEC fines and settlement costs that could reach another $20 million. $30 million in crisis management costs. Money that could have been saved if they had simply read my emails and implemented my recommendations when I first identified the problems. Do it, Dad said without hesitation. Spend whatever it takes. I spent the rest of the day implementing emergency financial controls and preparing documentation for the SEC investigation while my father and brothers watched helplessly as Henderson Industries' stock price stabilized around $26 per share. A loss of nearly 50% of the company's market value in a single day of trading. The financial press was already publishing articles about the Henderson Industries crisis, speculating about family business management failures and the dangers of nepotism in corporate governance. My name was mentioned in several articles as the newly appointed CFO who had been brought in to clean up the mess, though the reporters didn't yet understand that I had been trying to prevent this exact crisis for months. By the time the market closed on Monday, Henderson Industries had lost over $400 million in market capitalization, and the SEC had opened a formal investigation into our financial reporting practices. But the emergency financial controls I implemented had stopped the bleeding, and my preliminary response to the SEC inquiry had bought us time to develop a comprehensive remediation plan. Sophia, Dad said as we finished our first official executive meeting with me in my new role as CFO, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened this weekend. Yes, you do, I agreed. I've been treating you like a child instead of recognizing your expertise and contributions, he continued. I let my assumptions about gender and family dynamics cloud my judgment about your professional capabilities. Marcus and David nodded their agreement, both of them looking appropriately ashamed of their behavior over the past several months. We almost destroyed everything Grandpa built because we were too arrogant to listen to someone we considered less qualified, Marcus added. That's a mistake we can't afford to make again. No, it isn't, I agreed. Because next time there might not be a way to fix the damage. Over the following 6 months, I led Henderson Industries through the most comprehensive financial remediation in the company's history. We rebuilt our subsidiary accounting systems, implemented new regulatory compliance procedures, and satisfied every SEC requirement while gradually rebuilding investor confidence. The stock price recovered to $38 per share by the end of the year, not quite back to its pre-crisis levels, but respectable given the scope of the problems we had addressed. More importantly, Henderson Industries emerged from the crisis with stronger financial controls and a more professional management structure. And I emerged from the crisis as the CFO of a billion-dollar corporation, with the respect and authority I had earned through expertise rather than family connections. The emergency meeting that had excluded me because I wouldn't understand business had become the catalyst for my rise to the highest levels of corporate leadership. The family members who had dismissed my warnings had learned the cost of ignoring expertise, and the company had learned the value of listening to people based on their knowledge rather than their gender or age. 6 months later, when Henderson Industries reported our best quarterly earnings in company history, Dad made a point of crediting my leadership and financial management in his statement to investors. Our success this quarter reflects the outstanding work of our CFO, Sophia Henderson, whose expertise and strategic vision have transformed our financial operations, he announced during the earnings call. She saw challenges coming before anyone else did, and her solutions have positioned us for long-term growth and stability. It was the recognition I had been seeking for years, earned not through family politics or gender quotas, but through demonstrated competence and professional excellence. And every time I looked at the stock price ticker that now showed Henderson Industries trading at $42 per share, I remembered the moment when my family learned the difference between dismissing expertise and respecting it. Sometimes the most valuable business lesson isn't about finance or strategy. It's about learning to listen to people who know more than you do, regardless of whether they fit your assumptions about who business leaders should be.